Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Lazore. I'm the artist behind the Gaya installation here on Syracuse University on the quad. I'd like to thank Carrie Mae Weems for inviting me in Syracuse University for this symposium. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the installation, which is right here, located on the Shaw quadrangle, they called it, I believe. And I'll explain a little bit about the design and how I came about creating this installation. Let me see, okay, here's the tree. We'll start off with this. When I set off to design this installation with the group of indigenous students here at Syracuse University, we talked about how would it look and what did we want to do. It wasn't upfront that it would be an installation on the quad. There was no really knowledge of where it would be. Would it be a painting hanging on a wall? Would it be a mural? So as time went on, I did a submission painting for there was a call for artists, so I did a submission painting for the installation. This was pre-COVID. And I found out that I was chosen as the artist, and then COVID happened, Syracuse University shut down, and everything came to a stop. So as time went on, probably like a year, roughly a year, a little over a year later, I reached back out to say, hey, I heard I was chosen. Are we going to move forward now? I see Syracuse University is back open now, you know? And come to find out, within that time, the people who were on the indigenous students at Syracuse University had graduated. So they're not even around no more. So some would come back and help out, and then we got the ball rolling again. And with the help of Brian Conkle and Phil Arnold, we kind of talked, we've had meetings, and we figured out, hey, can we do something on the quad, you know? And they said, yes, you have the approval. And so we went ahead with the designing. I talked with architects, and we talked about kind of in our group Zoom meetings, what did we want, you know? And we came out, we wanted nature, we wanted things found in nature, we wanted, like the word kind of like an oasis kind of, you know, a place where the indigenous students could meet and kind of hang out and have our own little spot that is like a place where we can have events or even host things. So with that, I decided to choose the 6 stone pillars here, which would represent the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And then when we designed the actual installation, I wanted like tree trunks to hold it, and I wanted tree trunks to kind of wrap the pillars. But obviously they wouldn't be real because in time they would like weather away because it would be made from wood. So I said, well, we want something that's real in nature there. So as a nod to the tree of peace that was within our Confederacy creation story, with the peacemaker, a tree was uprooted, and the warring nations, war chiefs, buried their weapons of war underneath. And on top of it was placed an eagle that could see far to warn of dangers that would attack this peace. So in light to that, we decided to plant a tree, just like that on the shores of Onondaga Lake that happened. And this tree would be a tree of peace and friendship with the indigenous students in Syracuse University. And throughout the years, this friendship will grow like the tree will. And so as we reflect and look back at the tree, you can see how much it's grown from the time you attended Syracuse University. All right, and so that would be this part of the installation. Now we'll go into this. So I'll start with the border of the actual painting. It wound up being a painting because we didn't know what the installation would be. And so in the end, the painting became an installation, like a graffiti-proof printed thing on here, because we looked ahead towards if, you know, people didn't agree with it, that it would be damaged, you know. So we took time to take the heed to that. So starting with the border, we have strawberries, which is a medicine to the Haudenosaunee. When the Sky Woman fell, she grabbed plants in which some were strawberries and some were medicine plants that fell with her that she brought to earth from the Alunhiage, which we would call the sky world. And then along that, you will see patterns of flowers, and then you'll see traditional Haudenosaunee patterns throughout the entire painting, which would be patterns you would see on tattoos, pottery, clothing, and things like that that we continue to use to this day. Now, over here on the right, you will see a condolence cane when a Hoyane, or a chief, is put up. He's given one of these canes, and it's the roll call of the Confederacy. Each one of these little pegs represents a chief. There's 50 pegs on this cane. The left side is the younger brothers, and the right side is the elder brothers. The younger brothers would be the Cayuga and the Oneida Nation. The right side would be the Mohawk, the Seneca, and the Onondaga Nation. The Tuscarora would not be present at this time when these canes would be made. The Tuscaroras would fall under the younger brothers, and their voice will be heard through the younger brothers. So the symbols on that cane represent like a pictograph of the name of that chief, that Loyane. So what I did was I placed them along the border so that all 50 chiefs are present in this installation. So let me see here. Okay, now this is the circle wampum. This would represent the seating of the Grand Council of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Each string would be like each one of those pegs. It would represent a Loyane, a chief. And the top 14 strings would represent the Onondaga Nation, the central fire, which would be the top 14 symbols on the top. And then as we go counterclockwise, you will have the Seneca Nation. Then you have the Mohawk, the elder brothers on this left side. And then as you go around, you have the Oneida and the Cayuga Nation. Each one of these would represent these chiefs, and this would be the seating at the Grand Council when they would meet in the longhouse on the Onondaga Nation. So all of that is represented in the border of this painting. And then we'll go into, okay, I'll just leave this here, and then I'll start explaining the painting. We'll start off at the bottom. So the bottom would, well, when we talked about it, the original submission of this installation was a different painting. But as it grew and we found out that it would become an installation on the quad at Syracuse University, the magnitude of it, we kind of stepped back. I spoke with the council in Onondaga and said, you know, what do we really want to say here? What do we really want to put on this installation? We reflected and we said we want to hit a few topics. We want to talk about our role in the U.S., former of the U.S. government, our role in the women's suffrage movement, our own forming of our confederacy, and the sport of lacrosse that comes from us. So these 4 topics were given to me, and I was given roughly a month to paint a new painting to take its place of the old one. And so I got to work right away. While I was working, construction crews were actually building the installation. And so I ended up, you know, it's hard to take these 4 topics and put it into one painting. So as I did that, I finished it up, and I always contact the Grand Council and the Onondaga Council to get their blessings on anything that I put up, because ultimately it's representing the Haudenosaunee and, you know, Onondaga as a people also. So, you know, we got the blessings, we had words, and I continued to move forward. So we'll talk about the women's suffrage movement in the figures that I placed in this. The women on the left side, you have Matilda Jocelyn Gage, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucretia Mott. These 3 women, and there was also other women that were part of this women's suffrage movement, but these 3 women specifically grew up in this area, and they had relations with Haudenosaunee women where they would learn about our culture and the role of women in the governance of the Haudenosaunee. So Matilda Jocelyn Cage, which would be the bottom one, she's from Cicero, New York. She was the youngest to speak at the National Women's Rights Convention, which was the third one, which was held in Syracuse in 1852. She was 26-year-old when she spoke at it. She wrote articles for the New York Evening Post where she would describe the Haudenosaunee society and legal structure and how power was divided equally between the men and women of the society. She also noted how white women felt safe on the reservations. She was given a Mohawk name, Galunhiawi. She holds the sky, and she was adopted into the Wolf Clan of the Mohawk Nation in 1893. At this time, she was on trial for voting in a school board meeting. And the funny thing is that she was on trial for voting in that, while in her adopted nation, she was able to vote for chieftainship and have a role in that, while within the American society, she's on trial for voting in a school board meeting. So then we'll move to Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She's from Johnstown, New York. She was a leader of the women's rights movement. In 1849, she formulated the first concerted demand for women's suffrage in the U.S. In 1848, she and Lucretia Mott issued a call for a women's rights convention to meet in Seneca Falls, New York. She wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, which detailed the rights that American women should possess as citizens. Elizabeth would eat dinner with an Oneida woman while visiting her cousin in Peterborough, New York, which is just south of Oneida. She was influenced by the way the native friend would dress with loose-fitting clothing, tunic leggings. Elizabeth, along with relative and mutual friends, started dressing a reform movement called the Bloomers. She would learn while having these dinners with this Oneida woman about the Haudenosaunee culture and the role of women in our culture. And she also would advocate for that at Seneca Falls. Lucretia Mott is actually from Nantucket. The founder and president of the Northern Association for Relief and Employment of Poor Women in Philadelphia in 1846. She published a pamphlet with her speech called Discourse on Women, which detailed the restrictions on women. She stayed a few months with the Seneca women in Cattaraugus Reservation, which is just south of Buffalo, and learn about Haudenosaunee culture and also learn about women's role in the Haudenosaunee government. She also noted that she felt safe walking alone at night on the reservations without fear of being raped or attacked. She also spoke about that. The first, and then on the right of the painting is the first women's rights convention in 1848 in Seneca Falls. The center would be the women of the Haudenosaunee who would speak with these women and let them know that, you know, there is a society where women do have rights and women hold power equal or even higher than men, and voices are heard. And they would explain that to these women, and then they would go ahead and advocate for women's voting rights. It really wouldn't help the women of color at this time, but women did get voting rights from this. Okay, we'll move up to the lacrosse. Now, what you see is that the creation story of the Haudenosaunee, it talks about the twins that come down. Our sky woman that fell from the heavens, Alunhiage, was pregnant. She gave birth, and then the west wind got her pregnant, and then she ended up having twins. Was Dehalun Hiawagun, the holder of the heavens, which would be on the right, and then you have Sawiskala, the mischievous one, on the left. So these two would go ahead and create this world that we know. And in the end, they would go into a battle for who would rule this world, this earth that they created. Because it wasn't just what we would call Singwayat Dizo, the creator who created it. They both created it. One would make a river, the other would put rapids. One would make, he would disrupt things that we made. It created the balance on this earth. And so they played a lacrosse game to see who would rule this earth. And it came out to a tie after playing for so many days. And then they had a battle to where Dehelun Hiawagun got the upper hand on him, and he was going to kill his brother, but he decided not to. So they decided that they would split this earth. One would rule the night, and one would rule the day. Now, the story's a lot longer, but we call it Grandmother Moon. And what happened was, when the grandmother passed, the good mind or the good brother wanted to bury her. The other one didn't. He wanted to just throw her off Turtle Island into the ocean. So what they did was they battled, and he ripped their head off and kicked it into the sky, and it became Grandmother Moon. So because she favored him the most out of the twins, they decided that she would overlook him and his people in the nighttime. So that's the reason for the moon being there. Okay, and then we move up to the Peacemaker, and then you have the Tree of Peace, what I explained a little bit. This was a tree that was lifted on the shores of Onondaga Lake when the Confederacy was formed over 1,000 years ago. These warring nations came together. The Peacemaker asked for the most evil men in the Confederacy to be attended. He wanted the war chiefs, he wanted the most evil men there, to where he would put them up as the first 50 chiefs would be these war chiefs. And these title names remain as their names. And say somebody like me, who my name is Ganya Dakta, if I would to become put up as a Hoyane, I would lose that name, and I would take one of these title names until I would pass on. These positions are life positions unless you are removed. So the Peacemaker, which would be on our left, is one of the founders of the Haudenosaunee. He brought peace to the 5 warring nations. He holds a bundle of arrows, which I'll talk about later. And then we have Hiawatha, who also helped him. He was an Onondaga leader. He helped go out through the nations and convince people and talk about this peace that they had no concept of, because it was years and years of warring that we almost warred ourselves out into extinction. And later on, he would be adopted by the Mohawk. The Mohawk would be the first nation to accept the peace. Then you have Taradaho, the cannibal, the evil one. He was an Onondaga leader. He was very evil. He was the last one that they had to convince to fully form the Confederacy. And what they did was they gave him the highest title in the Confederacy, which would be Taradaho. He would make sure that all workings of the Confederacy ran accordingly. And then you have Jagunsase. Jagunsase would be the first woman that the Peacemaker would meet when he came across Lake Ontario. The Peacemaker is a Huron. He's from the Toronto area. He is not Haudenosaunee. He's not of the 5 nations. When he came over, he noticed Jagunsase. She would create meals for these warriors that were on the road, and she would use love medicine on them, and she would get into their head and then eventually, lead them into, bad directions, maybe where they would be killed and stuff like that. But because she was the first to accept his message of peace, she would become the mother of nations, and the Haudenosaunee would be a matriarchal society, and the line would run through the woman. You will get your clan from the woman. You will get your nationhood from the woman. The owners of the land will be women. The owners of the children, when people separate, go to the woman. So there's a lot that's involved in that, and that's when these wampum belts will come in. The wampum belt behind Jagunsase is the woman nomination belt. It basically puts into law all that I just said about the woman's rights. And they have, and the main thing about it is they have the power to put up chiefs and to remove chiefs at their will. And the next belt coming below would be the Taradaho belt. These belts look different in real life. They're a lot bigger, but to format them to fit in the painting, I made them smaller. But if you can notice, there's 14 diamonds going up, which would represent the 14 chiefs of the Onondaga Nation. And then you see the spikes going down on the side, and as it goes up, they start to go up towards the top. That represents the Tree of Peace. That if you look at the Tree of Peace, the pine tree, the branches go down at the bottom, and as you go to the top, they start pushing up towards the top. So that's what that would represent. Then you have the Hiawatha belt. which would be the national belt of the Haudenosaunee, which would represent the original first 5 nations, but also it represents 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however many more, but it would be all represented with that one belt because the first 5 nations would have the voice in the Grand Council. You will go through the younger brothers if any nation else would have any issue or any voice that needs to be heard. And then you have the dustpan belt. The belt right here would be brought out when the Great Law was talked about. It would be displayed during the Grand Council meetings to protect and keep their eyes dry from the dust, giving them a clear sight of the Great Law of peace as is recited. And the longhouses represent the ability for the Haudenosaunee to adapt to modern and changing times, that we still continue our way and we still hold our culture up high and continue throughout in our ability to adapt to new coming times and changes in our society. Okay, now we'll go up to the top part, which would represent our role in the founding of this government. Okay, the top on the left would be Gunnesadego and Onondaga leaders and leaders throughout the Confederacy that would be present. And it would talks about the Great Indian Treaty of 1744 that happened in Lancaster Courthouse in the center of Penn Square. Gunnesadego, chief of the Onondagas, were participant in the 1744 treaty. He recommended that the colonies adapt a form of government similar to the Haudenosaunee by forming a union of colonial territories under one government. He feared that the colonies lacked a strong coordination of policy to address the military threat of New France, because at this time, we were the buffer between the British and the Americans and the French in Canada. So a lot of the treaties would go through us. His words were published and read by colonial leaders such as Benjamin Franklin and influenced the United States Constitution 40 years later. Lands in Pennsylvania and Maryland for settlers were part of this Indian treaty, but ultimately 300,000 acres in Virginia into Ohio were taken for settlers to come in that weren't part of the treaties. Now, we go to this side, but for Benjamin Franklin, he had a thriving printing business in Philadelphia where he printed small books containing proceedings of Indian treaty councils from 1736 to 1762. It was the first distinctive form of indigenous American literature and sold quite well. So this great Indian treaty would have been published by Benjamin Franklin, and the colonialists would have read the Gunnesadego talking about that they should form a union. Benjamin Franklin referenced the Haudenosaunee concept of unity as he presented his plan of union in Albany Congress in 1754. Haudenosaunee leaders and 7 colonies represented were present. The Albany Plan of Union was for an act of parliament from Great Britain by virtue of which general government can be formed in America, in which colonies can retain their own constitution. It was not ratified at this time. Mohawk Chief Hendrick received a special invitation from the acting colonial governor of New York, James Delancey, to attend the Congress and provide information on the Haudenosaunee government. After Hendrick spoke, Delancey responded, "I hope by this present union we shall grow up to be great and as powerful and famous as you were of old." He invited Haudenosaunee council members to address the Continental Congress in 1776 in Philadelphia. In 1787, John Rutledge, a member of the Constitutional Convention and chair of the drafting committee, used the structure of the Haudenosaunee as support for the proposition that political power comes from we the people, an idea later expressed in the preamble to the Constitution. In 1988, the U.S. paid tribute with a resolution that said the original 13 colonies into one republic was influenced by the political system developed by the Haudenosaunee, as were many of the democratic principles which were incorporated into the Constitution itself. A year later, the New York State Museum returned 12 wampum belts to the Haudenosaunee in the Onondaga Longhouse here in the Onondaga Nation. And that's it. Thank you.
Time for one question.
How has this space been received?
I'm not sure. I haven't got feedback. Every time I hear something, it's that it's well received. People like it. People enjoyed it. And some things that just like everything, that some people probably don't like it. It is what it is. Like when the Daily Orange put out a newsletter for it, they completely didn't talk about the U.S. side of it. So it's just, it is what it is. I know that things like this will happen with any monument, any statement, and I believe that people like it, and I hope that they can learn a little bit from it. What was supposed to happen was there was supposed to be like a QR code that would lead to a website that would give all this information. But we only revealed it a year ago, and I believe it's in the process of being done. So kind of like what I just explained should be on the website, hopefully, Yes. Thank you.